Hello, lovely listener, and welcome back to the Aardvark Swift podcast. I'm James Bowers, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Aardvark Swift. Throughout this series, we'll be chatting to game studios, initiatives, and industry professionals about all things video games, from tips on how to get into this line of work, to studio cultures and projects to get involved in. This month, we speak to Marc Williamson and Carol Clark of Tag Games, an independent co-development studio in the mobile space. They discuss their long studio history, what makes them unique, and how they found it working remotely during lockdown. So, Marc, your current role as CEO, what does a typical day look like for you, and what does your role have you doing?
It's a good question because I ask it of myself quite a lot. The role is quite varied, really. There's my responsibilities are to the board and the shareholders, but also to the team. I spend a lot of my time in spreadsheets, in emails, doing some of that stuff that doesn't sound that exciting, talking to clients continuously. But I'm also part of our product health check team. So I get my hands on our internal products regularly to review them and feedback. There isn't really a typical day, which I think is the shorter answer. Things basically get thrown at me and I have to tackle them whichever way I think is best.
Despite the seniority, still quite hands-on.
Tag is quite a flat structure, really. I sit in the middle of the office just with everyone else. I don't have a room off to the side or anything. I like to be around all of the other developers. There's so much you take in about what's going on in the business just through osmosis, just being around people. So not the type of person that likes to shut myself away in an ivory tower. Definitely not that type of person at all.
No, it definitely works from what I've seen so far and the people I've spoken to through the course of this podcast. The sort of flat structure of sitting amongst the staff is definitely something that's quite prevalent and quite an open door policy, isn't it?
I'm in this position because, I've been in the industry for a number of years. I've worked hard during it. My biggest skill, I think, is hiring people that are better at the job than me. That's my best skill, I think, and finding and building the team best to deliver for our clients. So,
what about yourself, Carol? What's your role sort of entail?
So I am ultimately accountable for delivering our projects. I have a hand in kind of everything in the studio. I manage the development teams directly. So we've got at any one point in time kind of multiple projects. So I oversee those as a producer on each project, but I oversee the whole thing. Life at Tag it's never dull. There is no such thing as an average day. I'm involved in production stuff. I'm involved with all of the disciplines because I directly manage, the heads of our disciplines. So there's HR stuff, there's, office stuff, there's IT stuff. There's ongoing, continual improvement is a really big thing for us at Tag. So a lot of my time is spent kind of coaching and being a bit of a connector because I touch each project multiple times a day. They're talking to me about stuff and they're telling me stuff. And then I'm like, oh, actually that project could benefit from that piece of knowledge, or that project's already solved that problem. Why don't you go and speak to them? And just kind of, I don't know how to describe myself. That's what people like us exist to do. And that's what Marc is touching on as well. And I think, the leadership team at Tag, we try very hard to take that approach. We facilitate the good work that our development teams do. Marc does that in a very different way because of the functions of his role. I have different functions in my role, but I think we're actually quite good at it. Hopefully the teams would agree.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. So in terms of personal career history, how did you originally get into the industry, Carol?
My background was actually IT, and I was working in Dundee as an IT project manager for an internet service provider. But I grew up obviously loving games. One of my fondest memories is Dad giving me a Commodore 64 for a birthday, and just loved all that. And then, I was a bit of a Nintendo fangirl. So I really grew up as an avid gamer thanks to my dad, because he's not so much now, but was, and loved the industry. And obviously in Dundee, Dundee has been a hub for a long time, but I'm going to show my age now. At the point where I started uni, there were no games degrees at that point. So I did kind of computing. Anyway, my career track was IT, but a local studio was advertising, a very small studio was advertising because they needed a project manager. And I kind of looked at the job and I was like, I probably won't get it because I've never made a game before. But just kind of, with youthful naivety, chucked an application in and I actually got the job. And so I went and worked for that studio for about a year. They were about 30 people, I think, at the time, and we were working on like PS2 title for Sony and then an early PS3 title, because this was just before the PS3 came out. And then after that, I was there for about a year, got made redundant, moved to a studio called Real Time Worlds, who made Crackdown. I didn't join them for Crackdown, I joined them after that, but that's what they're known for. With them until they unfortunately went under. I worked on an MMO called APB on a very large team, one of the senior producers on that. Loved that, loved Real Time Worlds. It was a great experience. We've got a few Real Time Worlds people at TAG now, which I just love. I love this industry. Like, we all come back together again at some point. Real Time Worlds went under. I then moved to England. I worked for Rare for a few years. So I worked on one of the last first party 360 titles, and then I worked on the Xbox One launch at Rare. I came back to Scotland and I moved to Outplay, who are just across the hallway from TAG. They're an independent mobile developer. So that was my first experience of mobile. Great company, like great people at Outplay, and they're doing some really interesting things. And it was a great experience actually for me, because very different to console in some respects. And then about 2 years ago, joined TAG. So been around a little bit.
And obviously no two career paths are the same. What about yourself, Mark?
Yeah, I guess I went to probably one of the first games degrees that was out there. It was called Interactive Computer Entertainment, and it was at Teesside University in Middlesbrough. So I went through that degree and came out, and I suppose I was looking for a job in the industry at that point. This was about 2000. This was in 2005. Yeah, about 2005. There was a really interesting thing happening in Middlesbrough, a government scheme to start digital businesses. And me and a friend were able to secure about £3,000 to do a demo of a DS game. The Nintendo DS, probably, I think it had just been launched in Japan. So we were thinking about this game was going to be like on something we didn't have. And we were two students, so we had no ability to actually have a dev kit or do anything. We hacked. I don't know whether I should say this. I don't know. So we hacked. Yeah, so we hacked together a demo and got it working on an original DS when they first got launched, and started showing that around. And just going to industry events and just being those annoying people that were there showing off this demo all the time. Eventually, like, people realized that it looks, obviously we could build something, and it was quite interesting. And we started a company and we got a contract. Our company was called Houch, which was an old English word that means hug. And then we grew that company to about 14 people. It ran for about 4 years. Our first commercial release was on the PS2, a Bob the Builder game. It's not something that you set out to do when you go out of university, go and work on a Bob the Builder title, but it was an amazing experience. It was great. We did pretty well on that, and that ran for 4 years. During that time, I met a lot of people in the industry. I met Paul, the previous CEO of TAG, and when the recession hit, the kind of market that Houch was in just disappeared. And Paul reached out and offered me a position up in Dundee. So I moved up to take over as head of production at TAG Games. That was in 2010. And I've been here ever since.
Worked your way up from there.
Yeah.
I noticed you when I was doing a little bit of research beforehand. I noticed you'd gone to Teesside. It's come up a few times where a lot of people that have gone on to sort of found their own studios went to Teesside. I think it's quite a good hotbed for that kind of thing. I was speaking to Coatsink, and they were the same.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. So there was this Digital City scheme, which was the scheme that helped me and my co-founder Dave set up. And as we were leaving the area, because our business had failed, I think Coatsink was just started. I think I remember seeing them just kind of putting their first website together and doing their first job adverts. So it's really, really interesting.
Definitely. So a little bit of a different question for you both. So if you weren't working in your current role, what do you think you'd be doing? It doesn't have to necessarily be in games.
A little bit of a gearhead. So I was always interested in cars. And when I was a kid, I wanted to design cars. I think that was what I wanted to do. I realized I couldn't draw. So I started getting involved in computing because I wanted to, understand computer-aided design. I thought, I can't draw, but I'll be able to design cars on computers. And I just got into computing more and more. And then I kind of shifted into the mentality that actually I really like computer hardware. So I'd either be involved in computer-aided design or I'd be an IT technician, I think. That's me.
What about yourself, Carol?
I'd forgotten that this question was in the document. I don't know, because I wanted to be a doctor. I would really like, the kind of fantasy that you have sometimes, like when it's like, what would I do if I won the lottery? And for me, it's like a tennis coach,
Okay.
also an author. So I don't really know how you marry the kind of triad of medicine, tennis, and writing. It's like a kind of a weird, I don't really know. Like, I like people. So I sort of imagine that if I wasn't doing this, the people side of this job is really what drives me.
Yeah.
The facilitation actually. So maybe tennis coach.
Some sort of mentorship kind of role.
Yeah, but plus tennis, like being
Yeah.
out on the court and, being active or whatever, as opposed to sitting at a desk all day.
Speaking of being interested in cars, I started life out as a mechanic for Ford, so bit of a change as well. So what would you say for both of you would be your best projects you've worked on as part of TAG? What's something that really stands out?
It's sort of like being asked to publicly choose your favourite child is the problem. And if our teams listen to this, you'll cause a riot. This is not great for your podcast. I don't really have an answer to that. One, I'm not directly on the project. Marc has been in the past, so probably has a better answer for this. But also, every project has its highs and lows, the good points and the bad points. I do have a special place in my heart for Natural Motion in CSR2, because that was the first thing that I worked on. That was the first thing that TAG picked up after I joined, and really loved the team that's on that game at TAG, but also our relationship with Natural Motion. It's just a really nice partnership. We're like a genuinely great company and studio, a bunch of people to work with. And, the game, honestly, the game's not my cup of tea. I wouldn't have played it had I not worked on it. But it's actually a really great game for what it is, and it's done phenomenally well. So, yeah, CSR2, at the risk of causing a war.
We can bleep this afterwards, it's fine.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Marc?
I'll pick something that is in TAG's history that's so old that it won't offend anyone. So there's a lot of great products we've worked on, and they all have a little bit of a special place. But I think the one that stands out the most for me was a product that we did called Moshi Monsters Village. There's something so pure and nice about that game and the experience of developing it. That team was so well connected that we were finishing each other's sentences type of thing. It was one of those really weird things where the team was one. It was really on another level. It felt that we were producing something that was just so pure, and we knew the audience so well, and we were given freedom to just do kind of what we wanted with that IP. We usually have those freedoms and that trust and everything with our clients. There was something about that experience. There was some really great summers during that experience as well. I'm not really sure. That one sticks out in my mind.
Everything just kind of aligned on the project.
It might be actually that it was one of the last ones where I was the producer that wasn't really thinking about other people's projects as well. So maybe that is that might be part of it as well.
Essentially. So similar question, but slightly different for both of you. What would be your one big career highlight whilst working in games? Wouldn't necessarily have to be a TAG. Something that stands out as, oh, I can't believe we did that. Or you did that.
So for me, I loved working, for Rare and Microsoft. I've loved every job that I've done, and I've been very lucky in my career, and I've done amazing things and worked with great people. But I quite often say this to people, like if you told 12-year-old me that I would work for a Microsoft studio and be out in Redmond, and it's just amazing. But for the work that the team I was managing did for the Xbox One launch, we actually developed a bit of technology that got a patent, as well as working on a launch title. So I'm downstairs underneath my house just now, but up in the living room, there's a patent block, a Microsoft patent block, and there's also like a glass block from Phil Spencer, kind of, saying thank you for your contribution to the Xbox One launch. And it's just like, as a kid, if you'd said you'd get to work on a console launch for a business like Microsoft, like it just wouldn't have seemed like a thing that was ever possible. So that's a huge source of like achievement and pride for me.
Yeah, definitely. That is a very good one.
This is a difficult one. This is a very difficult one. There's been a number of things, obviously taking over as CEO of TAG 2 and a bit years ago, and the changes and development we've done in the studio in that short time. I feel immensely proud of what TAG is and where TAG is as a company, and the ability that we have to look after our staff. And I'm immensely proud of that, and the types of responses we get from our staff about the things that we're doing for them. But I think maybe one of the things that I look back and go, how did that even happen? Was really at the beginning of my, I wouldn't even class myself as being in games at this point. I was at that point where I was hacking together a demo, and I sold a guitar to get a bus ticket to London from Middlesbrough to travel on the bus for however many hours it was to go to London Games Week to accidentally bump into Ian Livingstone from IDOS at the time and showing my demo. And then 2 weeks later, be in the offices of IDOS looking at how we developed that product. So, when I look back, it's like, how did all of those things happen at the same time? The luck involved in that is immeasurable. And it's something that set me on my way.
Yeah, what a valuable bus ticket that was.
Yeah, I'm glad I sold that guitar.
Yeah. So moving on to a little bit more studio-focused stuff now. So pretty simple one, I suppose. How was Tag Games founded?
The original founder and now chairman, Paul Farley, was it iPlay? I think it was iPlay. He previously worked on GTA and was now like a design manager at iPlay, I think. And Robert Henning, our head of games, was a student at Abertay University. And he kept sending Paul demos for mobile games. And Paul was like, okay, there's some interesting things here, but artistically it's terrible. And I guess they met up to give Bert some advice around trying to get some better art into his products. And when we're talking about mobile at this time, where color screens were a luxury type of stuff, this was a long time ago. So they decided that they were going to just work together and see if they could put this game out called Dead Water. And they managed to get agreements to get it published on all of the stores globally. Now, each carrier had their own stores at that time, so that was quite a feat. But it did all right. And then they just thought, this is our chance to run a business together. I believe they started working out of someone's kitchen at that point, and that's when Tag was born, back in 2006.
And do you happen to know where the name came from?
I know that there were some other terrible ideas for names. So it was more likely that this was the best of a bad bunch. There's no official story about where it came from. So, allow people to make up their own conclusions. But Tag is a playful game that everyone has played in their life at some point. So that's where I like to think it came from.
That makes sense. And during this very strange year, have either of you noticed any positive or negative trends in the games industry as a whole, mainly nationally, I suppose, to start with? Is there anything in the mobile space that you work in where kind of come to the forefront?
There's nothing that springs to mind for me. It's maybe a better question for Mark, though. I've been very focused on just keeping our people sane, and it's just been such I don't even know how to describe this year. It's been insane, hasn't it? Like the challenges and not really knowing what's coming next. So I've probably been guilty of being very inwardly focused on our studio rather than paying like a huge amount of attention to what's going on elsewhere. Mark, what do you think?
The whole industry is facing the same problems we've been facing. All the conversations I've had with people, 2020 has been that crazy year. And like touch wood, the games industry is able to survive it better than most. So I think there's a little bit of survivor's guilt that, you see the rest of the economy doing pretty badly. And I think games are doing better than ever. But the main challenge, I think, has just been, as Carol says, keeping everyone sane because, we're used to working together in a room together and we're not doing that at the moment and won't be for the foreseeable. So that's the main challenge that most people I spoke to are facing. Definitely our main challenge.
I was going to ask, my next question was, how have Tag as a whole found it working through COVID? Was the transition to work from home quite straightforward? Did it take a bit of time?
Well, the thing that you need to know, James, is that 3 weeks before everyone was moved to work from home, we moved office. This year started for our business with an office move, which didn't go particularly smoothly, despite the fact we were only moving across the car park. Like literally from one building to the building next door. Great new office, like stunning new office, incredible investment by Tag for our people, which I have enjoyed for 6 months pretty much on my own. Mark pops in occasionally. I'm at home today, obviously, but 3 weeks before this hit, we moved office. So actually, in some senses, we were super unlucky with the timing. In other senses, we were super lucky because we just moved. There was something about already being in the mindset of just living out of boxes and boxing stuff. And because we just moved everything, you kind of know where everything is. And you can just put it all back in the boxes, right? So to a degree, the logistics were easier. I think in terms of how our teams work and the people that we have, in terms of uninterrupted delivery, I have been so incredibly impressed and proud of how our teams just kind of got on with it. They got set up at home. Within 2 or 3 hours of the vans having delivered their stuff to their houses, people were coming back online and they were just like getting back into, talking with their team and kind of getting back into their project and just continuing to do their work. So our people have just done phenomenally well to continue delivering for our clients, which obviously is what our business needs in order to survive. It's not been easy at times. There's a lot of organic communication and information that flows about, as you'll know. When you're all in an office together, there's just stuff you pick up on, stuff you hear. I can wander across the office and I can tell if a team's okay or not because I can see them and I can hear the chatter and you see what meetings are going on and things like that. And it's much more difficult to keep a track of just where everyone's at and how people are doing when everyone's off in their own kind of team Zoom room and you're not seeing them over coffee or passing them on the way to a meeting or to the bathroom or whatever. So it's not been easy, but I don't really think we can complain because I think we've done really well to get to where we've gotten to and to keep delivering. And we've all had challenges. There have been times where some people or some teams have struggled and we've had to kind of go in and provide a bit more support or whatever, change what we're doing. But really, compared to a lot of other people and things that are happening elsewhere, don't really have an awful lot to grumble about, actually, I don't think.
That's good.
I mean, I wouldn't choose this.
No.
But we're dealing with it. None of my close friends work in businesses anything like this. I talk to my friends, a lot of whom work actually in public sector organisations, universities and such like. And when I hear the detail of how teams are being run there and how communication's flowing or not flowing, and I hear about some of the frustrations people are having trying to do other jobs, actually, again, puts into perspective how much functionality in our teams we manage to retain, even though everyone's just doing it by being in Zoom constantly rather than sitting next to each other. So I think it's as good as it can be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Carol wrapped that up really nicely.
What would you say makes TAG stand out compared to your peers?
We're quite an old studio now, really. We're 14 years old. That is a really old studio to be an independent studio in mobile. There's not much that we haven't seen or done in the industry. So there's actually quite a depth of knowledge here. We're a platform specialist. So we don't just put out mobile games as well as other things. Mobile and tablet are our thing. So we really go deep on the platform. I would say that over the years, we've worked with lots of huge brands like Angry Birds, Downton Abbey, CSR, Rick and Morty, just humongous products with huge teams. Just about every developer or publisher under the sun we've worked with at some point. And we are quite well known in the industry for being that team that delivers for those clients. So we're an independent mobile studio and doing work for hire, and there's not many of those when you think about it. Like most other mobile studios are either doing their own thing, they have one big product that they support, or maybe multiple big products they support. And so yes, there's not many studios like us that do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it must be quite nice to be in the position where you've been around for that length of time, been trusted to work on quite big brands. It must be quite nice going into sort of pitches and having people approach you where the conversation's sort of already off on the right foot.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always out there pitching, always out there talking to people about how we could help them. We do get a lot of people coming directly to us. That's lovely. Our reputation in the market is that we will deliver for someone. So it's a great feeling when people come to you and say, could you build us this thing based off our humongous IP? It's like, yeah, we'd love to work on something like that. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Yes, I'd like to hear more. So how would you both best describe the culture within the studio, the team fit, and just the overall feel?
I think overall, we work so hard and there's a lot of intentional stuff goes on behind the scenes to try and make sure that we're a genuinely people-focused business first. So we employ individuals and we recognise that they're individuals. And so we try not to have one-size-fits-all processes. We just try to be nice. Like, I know it sounds a bit silly, but we try to be nice people who treat people well and we expect the same in return. And if we all do that, then I think anything is possible. We probably don't always get everything right, but we do try. We try to encourage really open and honest communication. If people have issues, we would rather know about them. We can only resolve things if we know that there's a problem in the first place. We can only do better if people surface things that they see we can do better, whether that's in the projects, in the games themselves, or to do with how we run the studio. I think personally, I feel really strongly, like I'm quite passionate about continual improvement. So within the production group and within the kind of wider management group as well, we talk a lot and we do a lot of work around just identifying kind of recurring issues and, are they things that we can actually resolve and manage out of the business or manage out of a project or whatever. There's that thing where if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying new things. I totally subscribe to that. However, nothing irritates me more than making the same mistake over and over again, because that tells you there's something you're not learning or you're not executing on the learning as well as you could. And I probably am a bit of a broken record at work. They get a bit fed up with me sometimes. But I think that kind of spirit I see in the people around us. And I see over time, each project team is just doing better and better and better. And as one project winds down and we spin up a new project, people are really good at taking the learnings from what they've done before and then bringing the best of that forward. So what we're trying to do, I think the evidence shows that we're successful in terms of how, on Marc's side of things, business development works in terms of new clients coming in or previous clients coming back to us again and again, which I think is the real telling point. But it all comes back down to our people being engaged enough and caring enough about what they do to keep improving themselves and also improving their output, because that then delivers results for our business, but also for the businesses that we partner with. So I think the continual improvement and the desire to just keep doing the very best job that we can, is a really strong part of each of our teams, our whole company. And I love that, actually.
I suppose, unlike studios that only work on their own IP, the difference with code development is if that internal culture is not right, not just to affect to your studio, it's sort of a knock-on effect to your partners as well. So yeah, sort of pushing for continual improvement and just supporting each other is probably the best practice anyway.
Yeah. And actually, I wasn't sure how I would feel, being honest, when I came to TAG. I'd never done anything like this before because I'd always worked for first party. I worked for the business that owned the IP or was behind the project, right? I genuinely wasn't sure I would enjoy this sort of environment. But what's been really interesting to me is, we work with so many different partners, clients, and particularly when you do a job like mine where you're not actually in a project, I kind of hover about across them all. What I was saying earlier, I can compare and contrast and you can see things and you can see differences. And just the exposure that we have to companies like, Natural Motion, to Zynga, to Adult Swim, and the businesses that they're part of. And we get to take the very best of what they do. And these are companies that are hugely successful and they're doing really interesting things. And we get exposure to all of them, right? And great people within those businesses, really smart people doing things that you wouldn't otherwise have access to being based somewhere like Dundee. And we can learn from that and pull that into our studio. And sometimes, we learn from other people's mistakes and other people's failures. That's part of it too. But I actually really love that, just being able to see into other companies. Because when you're working on a development project with another company, they can't hide things. And we can't hide stuff either. All the skeletons in the closet come tumbling out at some point. They have to, because making games is hard. Managing projects, working on projects together for any length of time is just difficult at times. And it's during the difficult periods that the truth comes out, all the warts and things become. So it's really interesting, actually, just having that exposure to lots of different, companies and people across the world.
TAG, we strive for that open and honest feedback that's with people internally as well as our clients. So when Carol says when the times get tough, all of the warts come out, we kind of go into our project with all our warts showing. We're not ashamed of that. We've been around 14 years. We've got the scars. We've been there. We've done it. We do have the depth of knowledge, the experience here, but we do go in and say to our clients, actually, this is the part that you're going to be best at. You're best here. And you should own that because you're the best at that. And we're the best at this. And together we'll do the best product we possibly can. And it is that learning through working with the best of other companies, which is, as Carol says, just an amazing opportunity that our staff get.
So I know you mentioned treat everyone as an individual. So obviously being a recruiter, there was going to be a bit of an employability and recruitment slant to this. So what does your typical hiring process look like? Obviously it would completely depend on the role itself, but is there a sort of set amount of stages, tests and so on?
It's generally pretty consistent across all the disciplines. The applications come in and the hiring managers, so generally the manager of each discipline, kind of triage all the applicants alongside our office and people manager, Caroline. And then they select the most interesting or the candidates with the most relevant experience for a kind of initial screen. So they do kind of an informal phone chat just to see bluntly, does the CV match the person? Because you know better than we do that often they don't. And then depending on the discipline, so code, art and design and PM all test candidates. So if the hiring manager feels that the candidate is a viable candidate. The test goes out, Caroline manages all of that. The test comes back, it's evaluated by, again, depending on the discipline, determines who evaluates the test, but there's usually more than one person involved in that. And then if the test is successful, there's a meeting scheduled. So normally it would be face-to-face, obviously, but just now everything's via Zoom. But at that stage, what we would do is get the candidate in front of the team that they're likely to be working with. And then with each development team, with each project team, we open it up to the whole team and we just ask who wants to be involved in the interview, because it's really important. Candidates are evaluated, one, from the perspective of, if you're a coder, like what's the quality of your software, what's your approach to coding, right? That's important. But what's just as important is, do you fit as part of this group of people? And each of our teams has very different projects. They're working for different partners or clients. The teams have different personalities themselves. So there's an overall tag fit that's important because people shift about. But within the confines of each development team, it's important that they get the opportunity to kind of input and say, yes, this is my next tester. This is the tester that we want to work with, or this is a designer that we want to bring onto our team and we feel really good about it. And those conversations are pretty informal. We don't, stipulate the kind of questions that the team has to ask. And then what happens kind of behind the scenes is, once the meeting has finished, Caroline sends out an email to everyone that was involved in the interviews, and Marc and I are CC'd, and everyone gets asked for feedback. And there's a few questions. We've got some prompts that we use. We ask for very specific pieces of feedback, which I'm not sharing. And it's our secret sauce. Or maybe I should share. I don't know. I'll think about that. Everyone gives their feedback. There's kind of an email thread that goes around, and everyone's just really honest, very constructive, very professional, but very honest. Do I want to work with this person or not? Do I have concerns? And then it goes back to the hiring manager to really make the final call. But generally, in fact, I can't think of an instance where the team haven't essentially just made the decision, as a group. The hiring managers, they have the power to veto. Of course they do, as do Marc and I. But generally, we kind of just trust the teams to pick their new people. Yeah. And they do. Again, the evidence suggests that works well, because we're pretty happy with certainly all the new people that we've brought in over the last couple of years and how our teams are functioning.
Yeah, that's quite a nice way around of doing it. It's kind of getting the team on board before the new person starts.
Then they're really invested in, they've chosen that person.
Yeah.
There's an implicit investment in making sure that person's successful, because you were part of the group that said, this is the one for us.
No, it's a really smart way of doing it. I've not heard of that before. As part of your recruitment efforts, do you have a particular graduate scheme in place, or is that more ad hoc?
There's no actual graduate scheme. We bring people in as soon as we feel able to do so, put them on commercial projects. Obviously, with the support from their team and their managers, they go straight on to actually delivering projects that they put their names on and go live. It's worked for us for 14 years. That's our current CTO was a graduate, came straight out of Aberdeen. And actually, founder Robert Henning, as I said before, was a graduate as well. So we see the value in bringing in great graduate talent, but it's got to be done with support around them. So you can only grow the graduate base of the company when you've got the support around them. So
yeah, that makes sense. I quite like that approach, though. It's kind of a learn by doing. If you've got questions, we're here.
And the way our teams work is everyone is so close. Like, the teams are kind of literally in with each other all day, every day. So nobody is left kind of alone like an island, floundering about if they're new and relatively inexperienced. And if we think about the graduates again that we've brought in over the last couple of years, it's worked really well. I mean, we've got amazing talent in the studio anyway, but the graduates that we've brought in, just we're so happy with, like, the caliber and their contribution, just really, really good. I mean, we're lucky where we're based, right, with 2 unis on our doorstep, pumping out more graduates than the local game scene can really absorb.
I know, Marc, you mentioned at the top of the show, before we properly started recording, that you've had quite an interesting week. It's not something you can particularly talk about. Is there anything you can share that you're looking forward to in the future? Like, what does the immediate to sort of mid-term future hold for TAG?
I think there's something on the horizon that could be humongous coming out of TAG. Obviously, we've worked on huge products and worked with some huge companies. It's hard to say without saying. We've got some really interesting things coming up, some really interesting products. And I think they're going to be the biggest, most ambitious products that TAG's ever worked on to this point. And that feels nice, to be doing that kind of work. So, yeah, I think you look back at this or listen back to this in a couple of years, you might understand what I'm talking about. but I can't tell you right now.
Very busy weeks is what's ahead.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting. Well, I mean, 2020 has been pretty interesting as it is, but the last few weeks have been very interesting here at TAG.
That's good to know. So before we sort of wrap up then, is there anything that I've missed that you'd like to promote or talk about?
Just keep an eye on TAG, and there'll be definitely some roles coming up soon. Keep an eye on what we're up to, because we're going to need some great talent to make some of these things happen, and come work with us. I mean, that's just a blatant plug.
That's fine, they're allowed. So that pretty much wraps up my interrogation then. So thank you for doing this.
Thanks, James.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for listening to the Aardvark Swift podcast. This episode was recorded, hosted, produced, and edited by me, James Bowers. If you have any comments or suggestions for the podcast, or if you'd like to feature on a future episode, please email james.b@aswift.com. Special thanks go out to Marc, Williamson, and Carol Clark for spending time with us this time. If you're looking to break into video games or make a transition to a new role, be sure to check out the Aardvark Swift website, aswift.com, where we have hundreds of industry vacancies at studios both at home and abroad. Be sure to follow us across social for the latest news and roles. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn and Facebook under our handle at Aardvark Swift. We also have a behind the scenes Instagram account where you can see what we get up to and what it's like to work here at Life at Aardvark. The music in this episode is from Incompetech by Kevin MacLeod. To learn more, visit incompetech.com.